And, rest, therefore, becomes essential for progress. If we're finding that we've got this kind of very critical voice telling us, oh, don't be ridiculous, rest is for ninnies, and I don't need to rest, and I must always show up fully, because if I don't, I'm somehow letting myself or other people down. That can be a big one. Then it can be useful actually to tell that voice about the fact that if we don't rest, we won't get the gains that we want. Welcome to the Henny Flynn podcast, the podcast that's all about deepening our self-awareness with profound self-compassion. I'm Henny. I write, coach and speak about how exploring our inner world can transform how we experience our outer world, all founded on a bedrock of self-love. Settle in and listen and see where the episode takes you. So here we are, coming toward the end of another season. I feel that's how I say that quite a lot. I can't quite believe that we are at this point again. But yes, season 12 is on the horizon, and who knows what that might hold for us. I wanted to close this season talking about rest, talking about the importance of rest. I see again and again in the people that I work with a capital W, with friends, with family, how so often we can ignore our own need for rest. And by that, I don't just mean the perhaps the kind of more obvious idea of resting, like lying down and taking time off, going on holiday. I mean also that inner rest, that willingness to create a bit of spaciousness inside us, to step back from some of the what may feel pressing thought processes that can whir around inside our beautiful, busy minds, and create some space around those thoughts. So for me, this translates as almost literally kind of stepping back from myself, where I see myself kind of leaning forward, leaning into all of that thinking, planning, doing, and catching myself in those moments and taking a breath and sitting back a little and maybe just observing what's going on. And in that, giving myself a bit of a break, giving myself some rest. And of course, the literal translation of that word is really important. Thich Nhat says our body and mind have the capacity to heal themselves if we allow them to rest. Stopping, calming, and resting are preconditions for healing. So that's not really rocket science, and yet in my experience it's something that we need to keep hearing again and again and again until it actually sinks down through all those layers of stories, beliefs, desires, wants that we hold within us, and sinks down deep enough that it actually reaches that deep inner wisdom, that true knowingness, and we are then able to enact it for ourselves. And my observation is that we often feel we can just battle through, and that's definitely been part of my own story. This almost kind of egoic idea that we don't need to rest, we don't need to put things down to settle, we can carry it all, we can keep going. It's a theme that we return to often in the podcast, this kind of stiff upper lip that we can have. But in our hearts and in our bellies, we know how important it is. I mean, we see it, don't we? When people are unwell, we'll say, go to bed. We know that it's foolish just to keep going and expect the body to be able to do all of its healing while we are still running at a pace that is ultimately unsustainable. And my reflection is that when we slip into that egoic state of believing that we are superhuman, that we don't need to rest, often it's from a place of fear. We're frightened about what might happen if we do. I don't know if that resonates for you, but I've definitely felt that myself. And stepping back from that a little bit, we're denying the basic human biology that without rest, we cannot heal, we cannot be well. And I think that extends across our physicality, our mental well-being, our emotional well-being, and our spiritual well-being too. We need to rest, we need space, we need calm, and through that, as Thich Nhat says, we are able to heal. We have the capacity, we give ourselves the capacity to heal. So this is a hard-won lesson for so many of us. And I know for me now, I am grateful to say that I see rest as being an inherent part of the work I do. And I'm very interested actually in how on some level I have brought myself consciously or unconsciously or subconsciously into a working place. The type of work that I now do means that there's a validity to saying it's important to rest. Whereas I wonder whether, even with all of the knowledge that I've gathered, would I still be wise enough to say that if I was still working in a corporate environment? I'd like to say yes. I'd like to say that I did. And in fact, actually, if I'm really honest, when I look back, I did learn that lesson even while I was still in that environment. Keeping on remembering it might have been a different thing. So I'm saying all of this with an awareness that it's not always easy, because we've got all of this preconditioned behavior, preconditioned responses to the world that can get in our way and stop us doing things that we know would really, really benefit us. And it's because of this preconditioning that I think it's even more important that we keep returning our attention to it. We don't just ignore it and go, yeah, I know I need to rest. I know that's important, but I've still got to get all of this stuff done. Often when we look at the stuff that we think we need to get done, some of it doesn't always need to be done. And so back to, what I reflect on, notice in myself, I see rest as being an inherent part of my work. And like I said, maybe that is part of what makes it easier, because I can call it work. Yes, little mental note there. But if I'm not rested, how can I show up fully and give of myself in service to others in the coaching work, in the retreats, whatever it might be? I'm no use to anyone if I'm exhausted. And in fact, it's a disservice. My sense is that it would be a disservice if I showed up when I'm not able to be fully present, because part or much of me is exhausted. But that phrase, I'm no use to anyone if I'm exhausted, I think so many of us could say that regardless of whether we have a job, whatever a job actually is these days, whatever we sort of call our work, or whether our sort of work in life is caring for others, or whatever we might do with our waking hours. That phrase, "I'm no use to anyone if I'm exhausted," I think it applies to so many of us, and this whole sort of meandering thought process, you might have been able to tell that we're in one of these episodes. I just wanted to really explore it with you. It reminds me of a conversation that I had with Carl Minot way back in series 1, where we talked about how he had borrowed from his future self when his father died. And this phrase has really resonated with lots of people. And in fact, it's something that I discussed when I was on stage a couple of weeks ago at the Wellbeing by the Lakes Festival, and we were talking about reimagining elderhood. And I shared this idea of borrowing from our future self and how important it is that we repay that debt. And we discussed this idea, this concept. It really resonated with people because so often we can find ourselves doing this. We're in a particularly tough time. Things are very busy. Work feels very stressful. Maybe there's stuff going on in the family unit. Maybe we're just exhausted by the stuff that we're consuming in the media. Things are happening in the world around us, climate change, all of that. It feels exhausting. We are depleted. We feel low on resources. So we, inverted commas, borrow from our future self. We rely on the fact that there's this kind of resource that we can just keep drawing on. But the truth, of course, is that we're not a bottomless well of energy, and we all must replenish ourselves before we can give more. And if we don't replenish ourselves, that's when we burn out. And my sense is that there are many of us listening here who have either glimpsed what that experience can be, or who have fully experienced it, or seen a loved one go through it. And I suppose, if we were acting from our true kind of wisdom selves, from our true, most compassionate wisdom, this phrase that keeps coming up for me at the moment, then we would catch ourselves before that happened, and we would replenish our resources before they ran dry. It's interesting, actually. I used to run a retreat. I say used to. I ran it once, I think, just before lockdown happened. A very interesting time to have run it. I think that could have been the universe doing her beautiful, wonderful thing. And the retreat was called Building Your Self-Care Bank. And it was this idea that we have to pay in some way to that self-care bank, and hopefully build up a kind of reservoir, a savings bank, a savings fund of rest, of self-care that we can draw on, so that we are drawing on what we have already established for ourselves, rather than some sort of slightly nebulous, is it really going to be there for me, future fund, or future self, who might already be a bit depleted because of stuff that we've done in the past. Maybe it's time to run that one again. If that feels like something you'd like to do, let me know. Maybe we do it in person. Maybe we gather again in London. I don't know. Let me know. Does that sound good? A one-day retreat on building your self-care bank. That feels like it could be a really lovely thing to do. When I was discussing this topic of the importance of rest, and in fact, more specifically, the importance of rest and healing, which is, I think, now going to be the title of this episode, with Anton, he raised something which I thought was interesting. If you don't, Anton's my husband, this is your first time here on the podcast. And he raised something. He's a sport or kind of, physical well-being has always been very important for him, and has always been a big part of his mental well-being as well. One of the things he talks about is that if you don't rest in sport, you won't get the gains that you want. So it's not just about if you get injured in sport and you don't rest, then you won't heal. Anton was also saying if you don't rest, then you won't get the gains that you want, because you won't allow your muscles to heal and to build and to become stronger. So we're back to this thing about the importance of rest, not only in healing when we are already depleted, but in providing us with the strength to keep moving forward in a really well way. And, rest, therefore, becomes essential for progress. If we're finding that we've got this kind of very critical voice telling us, oh, don't be ridiculous, rest is for ninnies, and I don't need to rest, and I must always show up fully, because if I don't, I'm somehow letting myself or other people down. That can be a big one. Then it can be useful, actually, to tell that voice about the fact that if we don't rest, we won't get the gains that we want. To perhaps even research, look up on Google, like why resting in sport is so important. Why do top athletes take time to rest? And, maybe sort of show that internal critic some of that evidence. Perhaps just to help educate it, not to shut it down, because it's obviously telling you what it believes and what it believes you need to know. But I think that kind of re-education of our inner parts can sometimes be a really beautiful, gentle, kind thing to do. And this thing about evidence, actually, I think there are three sort of areas that I think can be really interesting to explore around this idea of the importance of resting. And actually, just before I go on to those, you might be aware that it's now, where are we? We're sort of coming up toward the end of September, and I'm just have come out of my time of rest. I take August off each month. I go off and I do things. So I'm not like physically resting, but I am resting my brain from the specifics of the work that I do. And by doing that, I enable some more creative thinking to come in. I create a bit of spaciousness for other ideas to flourish. And I find that really benefits me. I can see there is a tangible benefit. So if my inner critic starts piping up, which she can do, saying, you need to work harder, you need to work longer, you need to work more, actually, I can turn to her with some really, really tangible evidence to say, aha, I understand you, my darling, and look at what happens when I do rest. So that can also be a really lovely exercise, actually, is to look back across your life, recent history, longer term history, and just see where can you see moments where rest has really benefited you, so that you gather that evidence rather than simply maybe looking around you and believing that nobody else rests and therefore you shouldn't. That can often be a thing that happens when we're in a busy workplace. So I think there's something here about if we're not resting, it's very hard for us to think clearly. Our thinking becomes very narrow, very one-dimensional. And we can become so busy in the doing that we lose track of what else, the kind of deeper, wider, more creative, expansive stuff, what else actually could really benefit from our attention. And there's a couple of things here, I think. One is around the importance of being in our parasympathetic nervous system, the part of our system that actually enables us to rest, to repair cells, to digest, to heal our body, as opposed to being in the sympathetic, which is our active fight or flight, get stuff done system. They're both vital for us, and often in modern culture, we spend most of our time in the sympathetic rather than the parasympathetic. So if that's something where there's a bit of a mismatch, maybe you just sense you're not spending enough time allowing your body to come into that place of deep rest. Often we don't even do it when we sleep because we're so hyper vigilant. Then, finding some mindfulness exercises or meditation can be really good. So I will put a link to my Insight Timer profile on Insight Timer I got myself a bit confused there. I will put a link to my Insight Timer profile in the notes for this show. But also you can just search my name on Insight Timer, and I've got lots of 5-minute meditations, really, really accessible to anybody who's never done meditation or mindfulness practice before. And just doing something like that 5 minutes a day can have a profound effect on your body, because it teaches your body how to come into that parasympathetic place, teaches your body how to rest, how to settle, how to be calm. Back to Thich Nhat quote about the importance of being calm. What was the other thing I was going to say? So in our brain, there's we can sort of think about it in the sense that there are almost sort of two ways of thinking. One is this very narrowed, focused, single-minded, get stuff done, follow the logical steps, really pointed attention on a single action that needs to happen. And it's really important and it's really valuable. Challenge is, again, in the modern world, we tend to value that sometimes more than we value the other way of thinking, which is the expansive, creative, open-minded way of thinking. And it's actually really, really important that we practice coming into both of those ways, because it's in that creative space, that expansive creative space, that we often do our best problem solving. And there's a really interesting book which is all about coaching with compassion. It is an academic book, but it's also something that is targeted at all of us, to be able to read. And it's talks about the value and the importance of these two ways of thinking. So I'll put a link to that as well, in case you're a coach or a healer of some kind, or you just love to learn about that kind of stuff. So I briefly mentioned about there are three sort of other areas where I think this idea of rest and healing can be really interesting to explore. And one of them was that I remember reading about some studies in Denmark, and I think it was in a book called Happiness, or it may have been research from the Happiness Institute in Denmark. I'm not sure. I did try and look it up actually before coming on and talking with you, but I got lost in a a whole series of wormholes on Google. So if it's something that you're interested in, just have a little Google about it. But basically, it was exploring where companies who insisted on people taking a lunch break actually saw productivity increase, even with those who had initially resisted the initiative, because often we might think that we don't necessarily believe that we'll be more productive if we rest. But it's really, really stuck with me, this idea of the importance of lunch. And I was someone who never, ever took it, ever. And actually got kind of called out on it by some colleagues who told me once that I was being a bad influence when I thought I was being a great influence. Look at me, I'm working so hard. But actually, I now see they were right. It was actually really important that we take a break. And I perhaps would have been far better at my job if I had done that. So I think there's something really important there about making sure that we take some time out for ourselves each day. And the other bit of research that was related to that was there was a piece, an organisation took that thinking around getting everybody to take lunch one step further, because they realised that people were sort of not really doing it. They were kind of saying, yeah, I'll do it, and then they weren't. And so for a year, they made lunch for everybody in the organisation. I think there were like sort of 50 or 60 people in the company. And they did it as a company perk. It was part of their contract for that year. They fed everybody in the work cafe or canteen, and everybody ate together. Everyone ate at the same time. Everyone came and sat at tables together, and that is from the cleaner to the CEO. Everybody, right the way throughout the hierarchy. People who literally just started, people who've been there for 30 years, they all ate together. Nobody sat at the same seat. They were really careful about making sure that people sat in different places each day and kind of mixed. And again, there was some resistance to it, but that quickly faded when people understood the value of that human connection with each other. And, if you have the ability to influence something like that in your own workplace, what an incredible thing to do. Now, obviously, there's a cost to that organisation funding lunch, food for all those people each day. But what they found at the end of the year when they did the numbers was that productivity had increased way more than the cost of actually doing that, cost of providing that food. So I think that is really, really interesting, and I really wish I could find the piece of research for you, but just trust me, I did read about it. Actually, there was a piece of research that was conducted by Oxford University, which I did dig up when I was doing my research before today, which revealed, and I quote, that the more often people eat with others, the more likely they are to feel happy and satisfied with their lives. And the professor who was in charge of the research from Oxford's experimental psychology department said, the study suggests that social eating has an important role in the facilitation of social bonding, and that communal eating may have even evolved as a mechanism for humans to do just that. So he's basically saying that perhaps we instinctively choose to eat with other humans because we are evolved to do that as a way of creating those social bonds. So you can imagine the impact of that in the workplace. And going back to this point around rest, I think we can see there's this sort of double whammy. You get the rest away from the desk and you get this interaction with others. So I think that is really, really fascinating. And then the other thing as well that I wanted to call out was how a piece of research has looked into the value of the 4-day week, and it's an organisation called 4-Day Week Global. And I've looked at their outcomes, and I think their outcomes are really interesting. I don't know anything about the think tank that sits behind it, so let's just reserve judgment about what drove this piece of research. However, they've worked with 61 companies from June to December last year, 2022. With nearly 3,000 workers, and it's the world's biggest 4-day work week experiment. And as an outcome of that, 92% of companies involved in that survey or that research say they're continuing with the 4-day week permanently. And of the 5 companies not moving forward, 2 are extending their trials and 3 are pausing for the moment. So I think that says a lot about the value that we can see in an organisation of a 4-day week. And there's lots of research about the value of having a 3-day weekend. So I think that, if we look at how organisations are now beginning to understand that actually having greater rest, integral rest in our working week, or our traditional working week, can actually really benefit the organisation because it so benefits the individuals within it. And lastly, I was listening to a fantastic podcast called The Hidden Brain, and if you don't know it, I really recommend it. It's basically psychology and neuroscience and lots of interesting stuff about what makes humans tick. In one of the episodes on that I listened to recently, they were talking about how research also shows us that it is important that we rest at the same time as other people. So what that means is that having weekends and knowing that other people around us are also resting on those weekends make the value of the rest that we experience during the weekend feel even more beneficial. So isn't that interesting that psychologically we're connected to that kind of our wider community to such a degree that we get even greater benefit when we know that other people are resting. And for me, I think this sort of comes back to the intrinsic importance of rest, that not only do we get benefit when we rest, we also get benefit when other people rest too. And obviously for so many of us, we can't just choose to do a 4-day week, or we can't choose not to work on the weekend. But what we can do is see, well, where are we denying ourselves the privilege or the benefits of resting, whether that is in a tiny way, taking 5 minutes out of our day to do a meditation, or taking some time to do a yoga nidra. And if you're not familiar with yoga nidra and you haven't yet signed up to my mailing list, then sign up on the website hennyflynn.co.uk and you'll get a free recording of a yoga nidra, which is basically deep rest. It's a lovely lie down with a blanket on you. What is not to love about that? And it takes your body into a deep place of parasympathetic rest and repair. We can do a yoga nidra for kind of 20 minutes in a day, and it just is, they say 40 minutes of yoga nidra is like 4 hours of sleep. So it shows you how much benefit we can get from that. So I think, we can, and also then we can sort of look wider across our lives and see, okay, well, at the weekends, it's important that I also spend time doing very little, not just filling my time doing tasks that maybe don't all have to be done. There's a reality to all of this, of course, and I think there's a beautiful opportunity to check in with ourselves and just say, is that just a story I'm telling myself? Does this really need to be done now and in this way and by me? Or is there an opportunity to bring a bit more restfulness here? And through that, create an environment where our system can heal, where we can be at home with ourselves, where we can be more rested. So that was a bit of a canter. I often say that, don't I? But I do. It's always very interesting, this kind of just when I allow myself just to go, well, here's a thought. Let's take it and see where it brings us. I hope there was something in there that felt useful, interesting, resonant, challenging for you as well. And as I say, this is the end of season 11. So season 12 will start up probably 4 or 5 weeks' time, I would think. Maybe sort of end of October, and take us through up to the heart of winter. I'm avoiding saying the C word. And in the meantime, there are a couple of events that I want to share with you. So we've got 2 more journaling quest gatherings. These are our Sangha for journalers, an hour on a Sunday, once a quarter, where you can come together with a small group, a small, perfectly formed group of people who are also curious or active journalists. And we spend a little time doing a meditation, which is always a really lovely thing to do collectively as well. I will share a couple of journaling prompts. We'll take some time to journal in private together, but privately. And then there's the opportunity to share thoughts that might have come out of the journaling, or questions or things you find challenging, or just to listen to others. And it's a great chance to talk about things that you find can get in the way of journaling, or things that you really love, or things that you find are really beneficial for you, because it's always helpful for everybody to hear about others' experiences. So there are a couple of those coming up. Take a look at hennyflynn.co.uk and look at the gatherings tab on the website to see when they are. There's one end of this month, and then there's one towards the end of December. And then there are a couple of other in-person events as well. If you're anywhere in the Herefordshire, Shropshire, UK board area, or you want to come and give yourself some really sort of deep rest and relaxation and come and stay nearby, then there are a couple of events. One on the 30th of September, Compassion in Menopause, and then one on the 8th of October, which is a whole day called In Your Body, where I'm working with 2 other practitioners, a wonderful yoga teacher and an inner voice work teacher, Abby Lath, for those of you who know Abby. And we are sharing some practices. There's no prior experience needed. It's in person. It's going to be lovely. And it's a few hours to be really kind to yourself. So that too is on the website. And if it's not yet, it will be really soon. I think that's it. It's time for me to rest and go and get some lunch. All right, my darlings. I'll see you really, really soon. And I send you a hug and a wave.